If you're watching this, then I have something you might want to hear. There's an important message you need to understand right now. That's what most people don't realize. They hear things like this and assume it's general, that it could apply to anyone. But sometimes, the universe lines up stuff like this for you, so precisely with where you are. Because I'm willing to bet that there are things in your life at this moment, some working in your favor, while there are others that are quietly holding you back that you haven't fully noticed yet. And once this clicks, both sides start to make sense, because something you're about to hear is going to connect directly to what you've been experiencing, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. You've been measuring your life with a ruler that was never yours. That's one of the biggest mistakes you're doing right now. You've been looking at other people's results, their progress, their timing, how everything seems to be lining up for them, and quietly using that as proof that you're behind. But you're comparing your internal process to their external performance. And that game is impossible to win, because what you're in right now doesn't look impressive. It doesn't look like progress, it doesn't look like anything worth showing, but this is the chapter nobody talks about. The quiet one. And that changes everything, because this chapter, this is the one that decides what happens next. There's something you need to do this week, and it's going to feel strange at first because it goes against everything you've been conditioned to do. Do one thing that actually matters to you, and don't tell anyone about it. No posting it, no hinting at it, no checking if someone noticed. Just do it, finish it, and let it exist without an audience. Because whether you realize it or not, you've been slowly trained to only complete things that get witnessed. If there's no reaction, no acknowledgement, no external confirmation, it starts to feel like it didn't count. And over time, that rewires your momentum. You stop moving for the sake of movement, and you start moving for the sake of being seen moving. That's where your energy started leaking. When everything you do is tied to someone else noticing it, you lose the ability to generate your own sense of completion. You hesitate more. You second-guess more. You wait for the right moment to be visible instead of just acting. But the moment you do something meaningful in total silence, something shifts internally. It feels different, heavier in a good way, more real, because now there's no performance attached to it, no external reward, no one to validate it. It's just you deciding that something matters and following through without needing anyone else to confirm it. That's where authority starts to rebuild. Right now, things might be quietly leaving your life, and it doesn't feel intentional. Opportunities that once felt open are no longer there. Certain people who used to be present are fading without any clear conflict. Even some of the futures you had in mind don't feel accessible anymore, like the door just closed. And the instinct is to question it, to think something went wrong, to assume you made a mistake or missed your chance. But that's not what this is. This isn't random, and it's not punishment. It's a removal process that most people don't recognize while it's happening. Because what's being taken away isn't necessarily bad, it's just not meant to carry you forward. And the reason it feels uncomfortable is because those things were stable enough to keep you in place. They gave you just enough to stay where you were, but not enough to push you into what's actually next. So when they start disappearing, it feels like loss. But it's more precise than that. Some things don't fall apart because they're weak. They fall apart because they're in the way. What's happening right now is closer to an edit than a collapse. It's selective, specific, almost surgical in the way it removes what no longer fits, even if you weren't ready to let go of it yourself. And that's the part people don't talk about, because if it were up to you, you might have kept some of these things a little longer. You would have tried to make them work, adjusted yourself around them, found a way to stay connected to something that felt familiar. But familiarity can quietly limit you. So instead of asking for your permission, life just starts cutting. Not everything, just the parts that were keeping you smaller than you're supposed to be right now. And once you really see it for what it is, you stop trying to hold on to what's leaving, and you start paying attention to what this space is making room for. There's a small window at the start of your day that most people give away without realizing it. The first 20 to 30 minutes after you wake up, before your phone, before notifications, before anyone else's urgency touches you, your mind is in a state where it's not fully locked in yet. It's open, impressionable, almost waiting to be told what kind of day it's about to become. And what most people do is immediately hand that space over. They check messages, scroll, absorb other people's opinions, other people's problems, other people's pace. Before they've even had a single thought of their own, their mind is already reacting. That's how your day gets decided for you. But if you take that same window and do something different, even something simple, it changes everything that follows. Not a rigid routine, not something complicated, just a moment where you sit with your own thoughts before the world speaks to you. Ask yourself one real question before anything else has a chance to ask you anything. What actually matters today? Not what's urgent, not what's expected, what matters. Because the first conversation you have in the morning sets the tone for every other conversation that follows, whether you notice it or not. Whoever speaks to your mind first quietly shapes everything that comes after. And when you take control of that moment, even briefly, you stop starting your days in reaction mode. You start them with direction. That alone begins to shift how you move, how you respond, and what you allow to affect you. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. You were never lonely. You were the signal others were searching for. That flips the whole feeling around. What if those quiet moments weren't emptiness? What if they were alignment? Time spent becoming something real, something clear, something recognizable. Because a signal doesn't chase, it exists. And the right people tune into it when they're ready. So maybe it wasn't loneliness. Maybe it was you becoming something that couldn't be rushed, only found. Thank you for sharing this. What's changing right now isn't your opportunities. It's not your timing. It's not even your circumstances. It's your excuses. There comes a point where the reasons you used to give yourself for staying where you are stop working. Not because someone called you out, not because something external forced you to change, but because internally you don't believe them anymore. You hear yourself say the same things. It's not the right time. I need to figure a few things out first. I'll do it when things settle down. And instead of feeling valid, they just feel empty. Like you're repeating something that used to make sense, but doesn't anymore. That's a very specific moment, and most people misread it. They think something is wrong because they've lost the comfort those excuses used to give them. But that comfort was never the goal. It was just a temporary cover. Now, it's wearing off. Excuses don't disappear when you're ready. They disappear when you can no longer lie to yourself convincingly. That's what's actually expiring. Not your chance, not your path, just your ability to stay in the same story without questioning it. And once that happens, you're left with a kind of clarity that's harder to ignore than any external pressure. Because now, if you don't move, you know exactly why. And that awareness is what separates a phase from a turning point. There's a version of your past that you probably don't like revisiting. A moment where you misread someone, trusted the wrong thing, said something you wish you could take back, or stayed longer than you should have. At the time, it felt like a mistake you wanted to erase as quickly as possible. But what you didn't realize is that moment gave you something very few people ever develop. It gave you a kind of awareness that only comes from being wrong in a way that actually costs you something. Because before that experience, you were operating on assumption. You thought you understood people, timing, situations. You believed you could read things well enough. But after that moment, something sharpened. You started noticing small details you used to overlook, the way someone hesitates before answering, the difference between confidence and performance, the subtle shift in tone when something isn't genuine. That doesn't come from theory. It comes from impact. The people who read situations best are usually the ones who got it wrong when it mattered most. That embarrassing chapter didn't just happen to you. It trained you. It forced you to see what you couldn't see before, and now you carry that with you without even thinking about it. It's automatic. You don't need to overanalyze anymore because something in you already recognizes patterns faster than your logic can explain them. And the part most people miss is that this kind of intelligence can't be taught. You can't read it in a book or learn it from someone else's advice. It only develops when something hits you directly and leaves a mark that changes how you move. What felt like a setback was actually a highly specific kind of preparation. It made you harder to mislead, harder to manipulate, and harder to confuse. It refined your judgment in a way that easy experiences never could. Pain doesn't just leave damage, it leaves direction if you actually learn from it. So that moment you've been trying to distance yourself from is actually one of the reasons you're moving differently now. It's part of why you see things earlier, why you hesitate less in certain situations, and why you don't fall for the same patterns twice. And once you start recognizing that, you begin to trust your own perception more. You stop doubting the signals you pick up, even when they're subtle, which leads to something very specific that starts happening in your day-to-day interactions. At some point, something small happens. Someone delays something they said they'd do, shows up late without acknowledgement, or treats your time like it's flexible while expecting theirs to be respected. It's not a major incident, nothing dramatic, but you notice it clearly. And the difference now is that you don't brush it off the way you used to. Before, you might have explained it away, given them the benefit of the doubt, or convinced yourself it wasn't a big deal. But now, you register it for what it is. Not emotionally, not reactively, just accurately. Because time is one of the few things people can't fake. How someone handles it tells you more than what they say. Respect isn't shown in words. It's shown in how someone handles what you can't get back. And when you start seeing that, your perspective shifts. You don't necessarily confront it or make it a problem, but you update how you see that person. You adjust your expectations, you become more selective about where your time goes and who gets access to it. It's a quiet change, but it has real consequences. Because once you stop tolerating small forms of disregard, you naturally create boundaries without needing to announce them. And this isn't about becoming strict or rigid. It's about alignment. When you value your time, you start noticing who aligns with that value and who doesn't without needing to overthink it. That clarity simplifies things. You stop wasting energy trying to figure people out, and you start responding based on what's actually in front of you. And when that becomes consistent, you begin to see a pattern forming, not just in others, but in how your entire environment starts to reorganize around what you're willing to accept. If you pause for a second and really look at yourself, you'll notice something doesn't line up the way it used to. Things that once felt normal now feel slightly off. Conversations don't hit the same, certain routines feel forced, and even some of the goals you were chasing not long ago don't carry the same pull. It's subtle, but it's enough to make you feel out of place without knowing exactly why. What's happening isn't confusion in the way most people think. It's that you've already changed, but your surroundings haven't fully caught up yet. Your thinking has shifted, your standards have moved, your awareness has sharpened, but your environment is still reflecting an older version of you. That gap creates tension. You don't fully fit into your old patterns anymore, but you haven't fully stepped into your next phase either. So you end up in this in-between space where nothing feels completely right, and it's easy to misread that as something being wrong with you, but it's not. There's always a moment where your old life stops making sense before your new life starts to feel real. Most people don't stay in that moment long enough to understand it. They rush to fix it. They go back to what's familiar, pick up old habits again, reconnect with things that feel comfortable just to escape that uncertainty. But what they're really doing is shrinking back into a version of themselves they've already outgrown. What you're feeling right now is expansion without structure. You've made internal shifts that haven't fully expressed themselves externally yet. That's why it feels empty at times, or directionless, or slightly disconnected. But that space isn't empty in a negative way. It's open. It's a vacuum created by growth. Old interests fading, old dynamics feeling strange, old motivations losing their grip. That's not loss. That's space being cleared, so something more aligned can take shape. And the key here is not to rush to fill it. Not every empty space is meant to be filled immediately. Some are meant to show you what no longer fits. If you let this phase play out without forcing clarity too early, you start to notice something interesting. New ideas come in differently. New directions feel more precise. You're not chasing them, they're becoming obvious. That's the difference. So if things feel unfamiliar right now, if you feel like you're in between versions of yourself, don't treat that as a problem to solve quickly. It's a phase where your identity is recalibrating, and it doesn't happen all at once. You're not lost. You're just no longer who you used to be, and not quite who you're becoming yet. There's a tendency to look forward and measure yourself based on what hasn't happened yet, what you haven't achieved, what you haven't figured out, what still feels uncertain. But almost no one takes the time to look back properly, not in a nostalgic way, but in an honest, factual way. If you actually sit with it, there are things you've already gone through that you once thought would stop you completely, situations that felt overwhelming at the time, moments where everything shifted and you had no clear plan, no certainty, and still had to move through it anyway. And you did. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not in the way you would have wanted, but you adapted. You adjusted. You found a way forward, even when it didn't feel like you had one. That's not something small. Most people forget their own track record and then wonder why they doubt themselves. Because resilience isn't something you hope to have. It's something you can prove you already do. Every difficult period you've made it through adds to that proof. Every time you had to figure things out under pressure, every time you had to keep going without clarity, every time you had to rebuild something you didn't expect to lose, that all counts. And the reality is, the version of you right now is built on all of that. You're not starting from zero. You're not walking into the future unprepared. You're carrying experience that you've already tested in real situations. But because those moments are in the past, you treat them like they don't matter anymore. They do. Your past isn't just something you survived, it's evidence of what you're capable of handling again. If you really look at it, there's a pattern. You've faced uncertainty before and figured it out. You've been in uncomfortable situations and adjusted. You've had to move without knowing exactly how things would turn out, and you still made progress. That's not luck. That's ability. And when you start seeing it that way, something shifts. You stop approaching the future like it's something you're unprepared for. You start recognizing that you've already built the capacity to deal with what comes next. It doesn't mean everything will be easy, but it means you're not fragile in the way you sometimes think you are. You've already handled more than you give yourself credit for, and that matters more than any prediction about what's coming next. If you're still here, still listening, I appreciate that more than you think. If any part of this felt familiar, if something quietly clicked while you were listening, don't ignore that. You don't need to turn it into a big decision or force it into something immediate. Just notice it and let it guide how you move, even in small ways. You're not as far off as you sometimes think you are. A lot of what feels uncertain right now is actually things settling into place in a way that isn't obvious yet. So as you move forward from here, keep it simple. Stay aware of what feels real to you and don't rush to match anyone else's timing. You're closer than it looks.